Hello, and welcome to What Moves Us, the podcast where we ask, what moves us? Or more accurately, what's going to move us in future?
We look at debates, themes, and decisions of the minute that will impact on the way we get about in the future.
Hello, and welcome to What Moves Us. I'm named Henderson, chair of the Rail Innovation Group. There's no Johanna on the line today because I'm instead going to be joined by my colleague, Deb Carson, who's the head of initiatives for the group. So we're going to be discussing our 10-year anniversary report titled Small Voices, Big Impact, 10 Years of Innovation from Entry Barriers to Scaled Impact. Now, this is a milestone report for us and obviously a milestone report for industry because it contains 10 years of insight from the group. So we've trawled back, done LinkedIn sleuthing, photo spotting to find the attendees from right back at the start of the group in 2016 and our membership as the group has grown pre-COVID and post-COVID. Surveyed community members, and we've compiled this summary report, bringing the findings together. So I'd say there's some really good successes to reflect on and some opportunities for helping small companies over the next 10 years.
Well, Liam, here we are, having produced another of our marvellous reports. And it's nice to have carve out a bit of time to actually sort of talk about it and reflect on it now that we've launched it and had some discussions and, brought it forward at a couple of our events and that kind of thing. Good that it's been well received, I think. But I guess, should we start? My question to you is, taking us back to the beginning, the report is celebrating our sort of 10th anniversary of the Rail Innovation Group. And, we're looking at the kind of journey, I suppose, of innovation over the course of that 10 years, using our members as a sort of conduit for reflection. So what prompted us to make the report in the first place?
Well, it's our 10th anniversary. Been going strong since 2016. It's a good time to look back and reflect on what we've achieved over the years, because working day to day with the Rail Innovation Group seems a bit like we're always sort of struggling or fighting to make life easier for smaller companies and sort of get that message across and try and advocate for changes.
Yeah.
But it's important not to lose sight of the things that have been achieved over the time. We'll claim all credit for it. Nothing to do with anyone else. We did it all. And so it's nice to be able to reflect back on what has changed. And also, because we went about this report, we could probably get into the methodology, but we reached out to people who had been involved in the community at the very start. And it was nice to check in with them and see how they had seen things change over the decade and, reflect on what probably had changed sort of seamlessly without us actually realizing or banking.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like, a lot has actually changed, and it's easy to kind of miss some of that because you just, as you say, we're just kind of, you know, delivering events. We're a membership organisation, aren't we? So we do quite a lot, just day-to-day stuff to keep the group going and like have lots of conversations. And so I think it was useful for that, wasn't it? Just to actually have a proper, reasonably in-depth look at
Yeah.
what has changed.
Yes. And I was very keen for us to get back in touch with people from earlier on, as I say. And I think in our, a bit like everyone else's decade, there was the pre-COVID and the post-COVID bit. And going back to pre-COVID, it was very funny actually going back through events, because the way the group has gone through the years is that finding the people who were involved at the very start was both going back and finding the memberships from back then, but also before we had the formal membership program, looking at pictures of events and trying to remember who these people were and dropping them down on LinkedIn, because obviously we've changed the way we do the community organization. So tracking these people back through LinkedIn to find out, oh, they're doing this job now. Oh, they've gone into this field now. Had or left rail. But it was nice to message them and be like, hello, with
Yeah.
answers to the
Yeah.
questions. Uh, Everyone was obviously very happy to do that. Who wouldn't? But yeah, it was nice to see what successes people had had and where they were working now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
It
agree. It
did
was.
remind me of our very first events that we had in Farringdon. I can't remember, it was a non-profit building. It was downstairs in a non-profit. I think it was a deaf charity, maybe. In Farringdon, seeing the very first event. I
Yeah.
still have the shirt that I was wearing that day.
Very good. Very good. If we're thinking about just sort of innovation, and what's changed over the last 10 years, it's interesting that from my reflection on some of the, some of the feedback that we got from the survey is that there has been a definite and a genuine, I think, cultural shift in terms of how the rail industry and the wider sort of sector, um, are kind of open to and are adopting in innovation and innovative sort of approaches. I think that's partly helped by, big projects, I suppose, like HS2, that have kind of really brought on, some of the much more, digital, high tech systems engineering and that kind of thing that's required for a brand new railway. So that's really great. And obviously, there's loads of other examples from within our membership about how, they're working with Network Rail on. Um, there's lots to be positive about. Our kind of press release sort of said, the biggest challenge now is not creating or manifesting innovation in the UK for the rail market. It's getting it deployed across the railway. That's the challenge.
Okay, so if we could focus on some positives that came out of it,
Yeah.
um, what has been gained or banked over the 10 years?
Well, the fact that we are quite good as an industry at creating opportunities, I think. Um, the fact that the government do um, acknowledge that. There's grant funding available, there's first of a kind funding available, that kind of thing. There is a lot of innovation. There's a lot of small suppliers, you know, constantly generating new ideas. We know that, we can see that from this group. Um, so I think that's a positive. Um,
So
I think, yeah,
would it be
there are projects out there. We are still a country despite everything, and I know that it's been, a lot of problems with projects like HS2, but we do invest quite a lot in rail and transport still. But I think for me, so it's like there is a change, but it was somewhat disappointing, but I don't think surprising that change hasn't been matched by sort of structural change, which is required in the industry to sort of bring those innovations forward more. Um, so that was quite
well,
interesting.
but as the high level findings, before we drill down into the problems, what's it called? The opportunities that remain. What are the high level findings of the report?
That is a good question. What are the high level findings of the report? Well, there were a few. I mean, we kind of let's start by sort of saying something about the questions that we asked. So we kind of we as we always do with these small voices reports, we put together a set of questions that we can ask our members that lead us into some useful post-survey discussion. But generally, we asked about overarching perspectives of, what people's perspectives and experiences have been and are in terms of how open rail is to new ideas, new players, that kind of thing. We asked about barriers for new entrants. We asked about barriers for people that have got their foot in the door as well. So we tried to kind of separate that out, because obviously we were talking to some of our members who are still actively trying to engage with rail, and then other members who are already engaging with rail but obviously want to do more. Um, we asked them a bit about how the Rail Innovation Group has helped with that, which is obviously interesting for us as we sort of think about our programme going forward. We asked about change over the time, so how the experience of entering or trying to enter the rail sector has changed over the last decade, whether the barriers have changed, what works, lessons, what does rail need to do differently to attract new, retain new and innovative companies and that kind of thing. And then we sort of had a bit of a look forward, what would success look like if rail was to become a more sort of accessible innovation market, if you like. So those were kind of some of the questions that we started with. And then from that, we built out the report. So there were 4 main persistent barriers continuing to slow down innovation. And those are, the first is that the complex industry structures are still difficult for innovators to navigate. And I mean, it's almost like and of course, and that's the disappointing bit, I suppose, is that still sort of comes up very strongly as something that innovative companies and innovative individuals trying to get into rail find difficult. The second, which is interesting, is there's limited access to decision makers and limited knowledge of, I would suggest from the feedback as well, of decision makers and executive sponsors, whatever you want to call it. The third was that the procurement processes aren't still not really designed to support innovative solutions. And the fourth point was that long, uncertain, and resource-intensive sales cycles are problematic. I can remember one of the examples given under that question from a company was that they produce something which is quite innovative. It takes so long. By the time it's got through all of the kind of very long-winded procurement and sales cycles, that actually it's outdated because there's something more innovative coming. So that's very problematic, that kind of timescale. So they were the kind of key findings.
So would you say a good summary is that over the 10 years, the concept of innovation and the need for it is now widely accepted. It is the deployment of innovation that remains a challenge.
Yes, it's the deployment. And also I think, let's be honest, I always think that the rail industry focuses on, things, products, artificial intelligence, digital technologies, cybersecurity, new approaches to decarbonisation, all of that stuff that's very important in the sector. But part of being innovative is to think about, for example, better innovative ways to procure so that you don't end up in, the valley of death or whatever we however we described it in the report. I don't know if you remember that. Do you remember the valley of death that we noted?
Having helped and worked with startups for a long time, yes, the value
Yes.
is a live issue.
Yes. So, that's part of being innovative, of the rail sector becoming more innovative, is that the sector itself needs to put its head up and make some structural changes at that level, I think. And that's for the government. I'm encouraged that, Andy Burnham as the new Prime Minister and Angela Rayner as well, actually, very interested in infrastructure, which obviously I see rail as being part of that conversation that, the Green Book, again, needs to be looked at. 'Cause that's, I think, where all those conversations need to happen. Getting projects more quickly procured is definitely going to help with the valley of death,
Right. And
to help with that route to adoption.
yes. So could I ask you dwell on one of aspect you said about you said a challenge that remains is about access to decision makers and sponsors. Could you elaborate slightly on that?
Um, well, I mean, I think what the members meant by that is that, I mean, that's one of the reasons why they join organisations like ours, is because it's very difficult to navigate your way through the industry, I think, and work out who the decision makers and the kind of, the leaders are. Because innovators need I don't know what you want to call it, executive sponsors. This is work. Let's work out how we can make it happen. Projects need to have senior ownership. So I think it's quite difficult to, I'd speak to many people who are sort of, oh, we'd love to work for projects like HS2, but we've got no idea how to get onto how to make that happen. How do we speak to the right people? How do we know what they need? That's the other thing. It's like turning it on its head. Again, I'm encouraged by the new prime minister talking about trying to match, like a regional approach that matches industry requirements with skills, and that includes, to me, that speaks also to innovation. Um,
Yeah.
because otherwise you end up with people going off making, getting on with whatever they're doing in their own companies, thinking this is going to be a great, innovation that I'm going to put forward, and it might not be something that the industry needs. So
That's true too. I feel like I need to do the voiceover of the chapter headings, because as you as you were saying that, I looked down to the bold text, which is rail is not hard to enter because of what it does, but because of how it is organized.
yeah, it's a
Yes, knowledge.
complicated system, and small businesses can find it really difficult to understand, where decisions are made and who actually needs to be involved. I think it's just the navigation of the system that's difficult.
Yes, and I'd say that from reading through the survey results, um, the other challenge I think that still remains is, again, the route to adoption, is that you're in the funding or pilot programs, you're in a sort of protected cozy box as you do the trial, and then that scaling up bit into mainline business, as we call it, the valley of death, scaling up everything else. That's where I think the support still needs to be found to help people at that stage. So they sort of print
Yes.
the plaster off, going, "Well, you've done the trial now, right? You've proven it works. Okay, what do I do now?"
Yeah, exactly. Because there might still be some more development work that's needed. Imagine, you've still got to keep paying people. You've still got to you've got to continue to develop the technology, and you've got to run the rest of the business while you're waiting for decisions. So that
Yeah.
period of time is really difficult, I would say, well, certainly that's the experience that's been shared from our members.
One might say, from ideas to adoption, the missing middle.
Yes, yeah, exactly. One might say that. And the system, like it's like the system is making adoption unnecessarily difficult, which
Yeah.
is not very helpful. And again, like it's the system. Innovation can help the system work better. That's that's the thing.
Yeah.
So
Well, very much both adoption of technology, both the adoption of the system and then actually running the system.
mm,
So yes, a
yeah, yeah,
circular
yeah.
thing. Okay. So what other key findings do we have?
Um, what other key findings do we have? Well, the key findings are the ones that I just set out to you: the complex industry structures, the limited decision making, procurement processes are not designed to support the solutions, and all of those challenges together um, are kind of act as a discouragement to investment and slow down the adoption of technologies, which is not good for small and micro businesses, and certainly not good for UK PLC. I mean, our report also said, or brought forward that, these kind of businesses shouldn't necessarily be seen as just suppliers. They should be, you know, almost seen as partners in helping the rail sector meet its challenges. And I think that's really interesting when you think. I look back I also looked back at some of the findings from a previous report we did, where we surveyed members that had been in receipt of Innovate UK funding and that kind of thing. And there were a lot of comments on that survey that we did around, p- certain companies who were pitching in for funds, and then realizing that there were other companies, doing very similar things, but because of the process, it makes it very almost adversarial. And of course, again, they're all, they're all separate commercial businesses. I understand that, but the government, Innovate UK, could actually have looked at that more. At who could we have as almost like a cluster of companies who are looking at this particular type of technology and innovation, what have you. It needs to be it's so kind of stark in lanes, if you like, across all of the different pieces of what is perceived to be innovation, and it's really unhelpful to silo everything in that way. Um, and look, all of these organisations that we talk to will all be looking at other industries anyway. They'll be looking at aviation, defence, energy. All of their technologies are highly relevant to those sectors as well.
Well, yeah, in the follow-up that I was doing on LinkedIn to track down the people and find out where they were up to now, it was interesting, some background conversation I was having with them and the people who have left the sector talking about how things seem to be more straightforward in other industries because they were slightly more logical commercial routes to deploying technology. But then I also found it equally as interesting reading the research, the people who had existing products in other sectors, and then they were sort of pointing them towards rail and having to prove the product and the technology again, even though it was a functioning, workable product in another industry.
Yeah, yeah. That's really important. I think it's like the clearer, faster, more consistent routes from innovation to implementation, I think is what came out most strongly, to be honest. That's what needs to happen.
Clear,
Um,
faster, more consistent routes. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Well, there's opportunities for all. I am encouraged that there is a early market engagement notice from GBRX about just this topic for having consistent routes into rail.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean,
What?
there's it's certainly not all doom and gloom, that's for sure.
Well,
Um,
I think it's certainly at base, after 10 years, the fact that people aren't having to justify the concept of innovation anymore. Um,
yeah, yeah. And that was something that, I mean, that's one of the things that we could be, surprised about, proud of, is that we've helped to create a community where smaller companies can connect with each other and with the wider industry. And it was nice to have that feedback from doing this piece of work. Um, you know,
yes.
and also how much they enjoyed being part of this, ecosystem. Again, that everyone's kind of they're all commercial businesses. They're all in competition with each other essentially, but actually, they enjoy coming together. We've had lots of really great networking events over the course of 10 years where there's been all sorts of conversations happened, where people have shared their knowledge, shared how they've their successes or otherwise in engaging with decision makers. It's really encouraging to sort of be part of that, I think. And also just the technology itself has changed massively. You think AI, and I know, of course, AI was around 10 years ago, but it was nowhere near as prominent as it is in the conversations that we're having now. Um, and also like the ability to sort of collect and analyze data and that kinds of things, which is obviously really important for the sector.
Yes. A lot of the products that would have been seen innovative 5 years ago now have to be deployed in a different way if you're assuming that it's an AI first approach. So it's a continual stream. Do you
Yeah.
think that we will get to a stage where we don't, well, sorry. So just on one of the things, my mind is now whizzing. On the back of this 10-year study, when it was very clear that the concept and the need for innovation is now widely understood, we have been able to stand down our recognized innovation program because that was about recognizing behaviors and finding champions for innovation within industry. We think that that is now not as needed because everyone obviously recognizes that innovation is needed. So now
Yeah. So
champions
we've
actually,
sort of deprioritized that, which is interesting in itself. Yeah.
well, yeah, it's an achievement, I would say.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Absolutely.
do you think there will be a time, let's say we go back in 10 years' time, where the word innovation isn't needed because it will just be continual development?
Yes. I mean, I think probably, well, I don't know whether it will happen, but it probably needs to happen because I'm not sure it's an entirely helpful word, really. I mean, because it's so subjective as well. I mean, it kind of means so many different things to so many different people. What I consider to be very innovative in, well, I don't know, digital technology is someone else might think is just absolutely, you know, they've been using it for years and it's not innovative at all. So it's, yeah, I'm not sure it's always particularly helpful. Um, so perhaps the concept could be defined better for the sector, um, which might help with things like, route to market and speeding things up. Because if you sort of almost set a time limit on something, that it's only innovative if it's from, conception to market within a certain period of time. Otherwise, it's old hat or whatever. Then, perhaps that would help. So yeah, I think it'd be useful to have a look at how we refer to all of these advances in technologies and what have you. And also the fact that because people do tend to think about innovation as things rather than approaches. And I think that's problematic. If we're moving on to sort of think about what the messages to government and wider industry were, which is kind of the end part of the report, then obviously our asks were clearer routes into the industry so that innovators know where their solution fits and who they need to engage with. That sort of goes without saying, really, doesn't it? Earlier access to decision makers, procurement approaches that are better suited to innovation, and then thinking much more carefully about what happens after a successful trial. Before you start a pilot, we should ideally be asking if this works, what's going to happen next? Who owns the outcome? What evidence will be required? What funding is available for further development? All of those things need to happen at the beginning rather than at the end. And then obviously there's a much better chance of turning whatever that successful innovation is into kind of, I don't know, operational reality or what have you. So I think, yeah, our message to the government was if you're serious about modernising the railway, then innovation needs to be treated as part of delivery, that not something that just sort of sits alongside and gets plugged into it occasionally. So, and we will be printing some copies of this report actually and sending it into ministers and senior civil servants in around the sort of rail, DFT, innovation, so that they can have a read and hopefully we can engage further.
Right. I was going to ask what we're going to do on the back of the report, but it seems like we're going to go door knocking.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it would be nice to be able to, we've got a whole cohort of companies who are prepared to talk about this stuff openly to help to get these procurement routes opened up more effectively and make the industry better. It's not like anyone's trying to do anything terribly subversive here. It's all pretty positive. But, we've made real progress. There has been a genuine shift over the last decade. I think that's what, we need to finish on that. The challenge used to be, let's try and get innovation into and innovative businesses into rail, and now it's more about let's get proven innovation through the system and into operational use, and that's a big change, so that's positive.
Yes. We're halfway on the journey.
Yes, I would say so.
Lovely. Well,
Lovely.
nice to speak.
Yes.
Look out for the report on our website. Thanks for listening to another episode of What Moves Us. We hope we moved you. For more episodes, you'll definitely want to subscribe to our channel.
Until next time.